Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, the public is only beginning to understand the extent of the crimes committed by Sam Bankman-Fried, a cryptocurrency entrepreneur who lost billions of dollars after his exchange, FTX, was revealed to be a Ponzi scheme. Sam Bankman-Fried, better known as SBF, has seen his net worth plunge from $10 billion to effectively nothing in the course of a few days. He's declared bankruptcy, was recently questioned by the police in the Bahamas, where he resides, etc. John Ray III, who was brought in to manage Enron following that company's destruction, is now the CEO of FTX. In a court filing last week, he said he has never seen such a, quote, complete failure of corporate control, including at Enron. From compromised systems integrity and faulty regulatory oversight abroad to the concentration of control in the hands of a very small group of inexperienced, unsophisticated, and potentially compromised individuals, this situation is unprecedented, he said. SBF engaged in extreme levels of deception to trick people into thinking his crypto exchange was worth more than it actually was. He effectively paid investors, employees, and vendors shares of the company through his token, FTT, and loaned it out to his quantitative investment firm, Alameda Research. The company seemed like it was worth more than it actually was at the end of the day. So this was an elaborate house of cards that fooled investors, celebrities, Democratic politicians. Here's SBF interviewing Bill Clinton and Tony Blair at a crypto conference that he put on earlier this year. Indeed, SBF had aspirations to play in Democratic Party politics. This election cycle, he was the second most prolific funder of Democratic candidates after George Soros. I talked about that on my radar last week, of course, but here's some new news. Not only was he a funder of Democratic political causes, he was also a funder of progressive and mainstream media. According to the journalist Teddy Schleifer, SBF gave money to Vox Media, the progressive news explainer website created by liberal bloggers Ezra Klein and Matt Iglesias. Vox also owns the New York Magazine. SBF made a grant to our friends at the Intercept. That publication received $500,000 a few months ago, had another $250,000 on the way, and was due to receive $3.25 million from SBF in coming years. Acting editor-in-chief Ryan Hodge notes that SBF's bankruptcy will leave The Intercept with a significant hole in its budget and has asked readers to consider making donations. SBF gave money to Semaphore, a new journalism project created by Ben Smith, formerly the media columnist at the New York Times, and before that the editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed. And SBF was in the process of giving $5 million to ProPublica. Now, ostensibly, this was in support of research to understand the COVID-19 pandemic and to prevent future pandemics. And to be clear, I believe that much of the pandemic-related journalism done by ProPublica, The Intercept, and other SBF-backed outlets is of high quality. We've cited it on this show. But SBF's own attitude toward his funding seems to be that it's all for show, that it's a front, literally. Here's how he described ethics in private messages with a Vox reporter. When asked if ethics is mostly a front, SBF replied, "Yeah, that's not all of it, but it's a lot." So in that case, what did he think he was buying with all his millions that he spent on media companies? Well, here's one answer: favorable coverage. And boy, did he get what he wanted. If you scrutinize the mainstream media, you'll find that SBF was drowning in gushing magazine profiles. Importantly, the news of his vast fraud and deception has not completely ended the favorable coverage. He's now benefiting from what I would describe as soft coverage. The mainstream media is treating him the way they would treat one of their friends, someone they like. Maybe he did some bad things, but hey, his heart was in the right place, wasn't it? The New York Times report on this disaster uses passive, soft language to disguise blame at every turn. The headline says it all: how Sam Bankman-Fried's crypto empire collapsed. Mr. Bankman-Fried said in an interview that he had expanded too fast, failed to see warning signs, but he shared few details about his handling of FTX's customers' funds. Expanded too fast? Failed to see warning signs? Flew too close to the sun? He defrauded people out of millions and billions of dollars. The empire didn't collapse of its own accord. It collapsed because he built it out of fraudulent materials. And the Washington Post reporting on this subject centered SBF's pandemic spending on pandemic prevention. And then in a recent Substack post on SBF, Matt Iglesias noted that he had a meeting with SBF and declined a business opportunity with him, even though they share a similar philosophy called effective altruism. Iglesias' coverage of the SBF crypto collapse spotlights the fact that without SBF's lavish funding of Democratic causes, quote, it's plausible Trump would still be in the White House. Those are some kind words for someone whose crimes are so vast, alleged crimes. And I think it's worth wondering how much of this spending on media was exactly what SBF is now claiming in those leaked DMs, sort of that it was a front and that it was in order to inspire favorable coverage. So the New York Times, the Washington Post, they didn't receive money as far as we know from SBF. But these are outlets that have had apocalyptic coverage of tech ventures. The New York Times, their reporting on tech makes it sound like every new development, Clubhouse, Twitter, Facebook, corrupting our democracies, the threat of those billionaires and how they'll spread misinformation, etc. When it came to this guy, it was pretty blasé, and it still is. I don't get it. What do you think, Batya?
All right. So the thing you're pointing out, that two things happened. He gave money to media companies and to Democratic politicians, and that he's gotten favorable coverage and a real lack of oversight and soft pedaling. Those are both true. And you're right that the Occam's razor explanation is that one led to the other, but I'm going to try to make the argument that they didn't, because just from working in a newsroom, the way that it works is, your boss doesn't come to you and say, hey, we got this money from this guy, therefore the coverage should look like this. I think what happened is that the billionaire class and the media class as it's composed now from leftist elites and the Democratic Party have class solidarity. So I don't think that the money is buying the coverage or the treatment. I think that they all have common interests, which are the common interests of rich liberal people. And so I think it's a little bit less conspiratorial, but I applaud you for covering this and for pointing to it, because yes, the coverage is insane.
Right, and I take that, I want to be very careful with what I'm claiming here, because I work for a magazine, a nonprofit magazine, Reason, that receives donations. Now, I feel like we're often accused of you're just doing what your corporate master or your rich masters are telling you to do. I feel like I get that criticism a lot from people in progressive media who also have their own funders and well, are you saying you just do whatever they tell you to do? So I absolutely take your point. I'm just trying to square the treatment, specifically the New York Times, how they talk about SBF versus Mark Zuckerberg. And it's interesting. It doesn't quite add up to me. You're right that it's not it's more someone gives you funding because they agree with your mission, they like your mission and want to support you. It's not so much we're telling you what to do. But it's clear that this guy did a good job of making him seem like a hero to a lot of journalists who are otherwise very discerning. In some cases, I think almost too critical of some other figures in related fields. So it's interesting, and we're going to continue to unravel it, because man, there was a lot of spending every which way. But we'll have more Rising right after this.